onto the Centre of Excellence for Youth Mental Health. It's been topical lately in the last few days. When we were here one other time, I had asked some questions around that. You talked about there being a choice between Campbellton and Moncton, and that the evaluation hadn't been completed. Could you give us any more details around the evaluation between the two sites? And I guess to cut to the chase, can you provide the evaluation to the committee or to us that was completed to determine the location being Campbellton?
Through the chair to the member opposite. Through the chair to the member opposite. I've given a bit of a background on this in the media the last few days, but I'm certainly prepared for the benefit of the member to repeat it here. This is a project that's been a long time in the making. This started, I guess, or maybe that's not where it started, probably started even before that, but in 2011 when the Staying Connected report was made public. This is a report that had been worked on by Bernard Richard and Shirley Smallwood, two well-known advocates in the province. They had made a report to the government of the day, which is the former Conservative government, and it was a over 100-page report. And one of the things that came from that report was the need to build a centre. And at the time, and I should mention this is a project that's been worked on jointly between the Department of Health and the Department of Social Development, along with the other stakeholders. So back in 2011, the idea was to come forward with a centre, but at the time they wanted to have a centre that was outside of government, that was, operated by a third party, whether it be private or community-based, whatever, but outside of government. And it's the former Conservative government of the day that came to the conclusion that it would be difficult to do that based on the various privacy laws that exist. It would have been difficult to share all the necessary information with a source outside of government. So the decision was made that this centre would be part of government, if you will. It would be built within government. And at that point it was determined that the Department of Health would be the lead department as opposed to the Department of Social Development, although they both continuously work together on this particular file. So then when it was determined that the Department of Health was going to be the lead department, the Department of Health turned to the two RHAs and asked the RHAs for their feedback on this. Both RHAs agreed that Vitalité should be the health RHA that take over the project, that basically oversee the project, and that it would fall under their responsibility. So that was agreed on by the two RHAs. So then when Vitalité was given the responsibility to look at this, they then looked at the Moncton option, the Campbellton option. There always have been lots of consultations on this, lots of discussions with various healthcare professionals and experts. And the board of the Vitalité RHA ended up making a formal recommendation to government that it be situated in Campbellton. I feel the need to remind the member opposite that a few weeks back, I don't remember the exact number of weeks, but a few weeks back, I had the conversation with the member from Edmundston and Madawaska Centre, being both the former Social Development Minister and the former Health Minister, who was part of this project from the very beginning. I asked her advice. I said, no decision had been made. I just simply asked her for her advice on whether it should be in Moncton or in Campbellton, and her advice was pretty clear to me. That Campbellton was the preferred choice as far as she was concerned. Now that's not the only factor in the decision, obviously, but I think it's important to point out because the member, the leader of the opposition, got up and was quite critical of the decision, although his colleague and former minister had just said that this was the right thing to do. So we've announced the centre in Campbellton, and we are going to continue to work with the various stakeholders. You know, the network of excellence that's being established in the province. There's a lot of very good community-based expertise and experts out there, and we're going to continue to build this network of excellence and in working with all these various partners as we move forward with the construction of this centre.
Okay, so back to the question that I had was the evaluation process, the evaluation paperwork, the documents that weight the criteria between really 3 locations. Fredericton and Moncton were originally the locations mentioned and talked about. Campbellton was a new location. Minister explained how that came to be about. But when deciding between the rationale between the 2 locations, there must have been an evaluation based on a weighted methodology that would lean towards one community over the other, a ranking or a weighted system taking into consideration all of the pros and cons, besides the answer that Vitality told us to, so that's where we're building it. Was the report that 2011 that Bernard Richard, Shirley Smallwood that you referenced to was quite an extensive consultation, and to really back this up a little further for the minister, in 2008 the Connecting the Dots report was really one of the first culminations of bringing this issue forward through an integrated service model that included a Centre of Excellence, and the 2011 report was a continuation of the 2008 that was working on a whole continuum of community-based right to tertiary, and the 2011 report has no mention of Campbellton at all, and strongly suggests that there be close proximity to university research, that the debate centered around Fredericton or Moncton, with Moncton coming out clearly on top due to its greater level of specialized services in both official languages, its relative accessibility owing to the highway infrastructure, traditional demographics of youth with complex needs by region, and most significantly the strengths of the specialized treatment services currently offered there. Moncton already stands out in many ways as the province's nerve center of services in this field, since it is home to the Provincial Child and Adolescent Psychiatric Unit, the Pierre Casey Centre, and the Peel Children's Centre, as well as the Moncton Youth Residences and its extensive network of residential care homes. The report also goes on to say that the Portage Drug Addiction Facility is also within the same geographic region, and furthermore, the University of Moncton has faculties of social work, psychology, medicine, and law. Moncton is also one of the fastest growing metropolitan regions in the country and is geographically the hub of the Maritime Provinces, which may facilitate the provision of contracted services to youth from neighboring provinces. Our view remains, however, that while it is important the Centre of Excellence have an administrative head office and perhaps a greater residential capacity in the region, the centre and its basket of services should be decentralized and operate as much as possible at the family and community level. So this is the report from the 2011, and why people like Bernard Richard, Maureen Billerman, Shirley Smallwood, and others are questioning the decision of Campbellton is because the decision seems to go contrary to all of these factors. And so asking the minister, could you provide the weighted evaluation, adding Campbellton to the mix, of how Campbellton's location will meet these benefits or these criteria that's laid out in the 2011, and balancing that off with an evaluation to Moncton. Can he provide that documentation that shows Campbellton was superior to Moncton or even Fredericton?
Through the chair to the member opposite, maybe I think the part that the member maybe he recognizes, maybe he doesn't, but it's from the time the report was made public to the time the announcement was made, there was a change in the scope, if you will, of the project when it was determined that it could no longer be, a community-based center or a center run by the private sector or by the, a community-based organization because of privacy legislation. So that changed somewhat the scope of the project, and that's when it was determined, as I've said a few times, that's when it was determined that it would fall under the responsibility of the Department of Health. So that's when we then, engaged even more so the two RHAs. They come to the agreement that it would be Vitalité, and then within Vitalité, they came to the agreement that it would be Campbellton. Now, Vitalité is very much aware of the need to develop those outreach services, because let's not forget that this center is a last resort. We don't want our children with mental health needs to have to go to this center, but there are occasions where it's needed, but it's a last resort. And the idea is to continue to develop this network of excellence around the province, which for the most part is community-based. So this center kind of acts as the hub, but then there are many spokes to that hub, and that community support, that community base, that community network is what's going to be important. And Vitalité is well aware of the need of expanding and building that outreach network. But there already is, a base of knowledge, of expertise in Campbellton, and this becomes a subspecialty, if you will. It's not adult mental health, it's children and youth mental health, but there's still the whole idea of clustering and of building building up a capacity in a particular field. So that's why Vitalité has pointed to that. Now, the member knows full well, having been a minister under two different governments, that there are certain things that are protected as advice to ministers. So the actual report or the actual document that the member would like to see is something that is considered advice to minister, and it's not something that can be shared here. It's protected by cabinet confidentiality, but the RHA, obviously, in making its recommendation, this was done in a public forum. It was done during a meeting of the board of Vitalité, and the minutes are recorded, and that certainly was the basis of the decision.
Yeah, and if I had to guess, looking at the criteria outlined in the 2011 report, regardless if it's government-run or community nonprofit or privately run, the criteria still stands in terms of geographic location, accessible geographically to residents in both linguistic communities, close to university research, and would facilitate recruitment and retention of leading experts for children and youth. So it goes through all of these reasons, existing child and adolescent psychiatric unit, lots of items here. So one could probably guess that whether an evaluation was done between Campbellton being added to the mix or not, or if we could clearly show that Campbellton was superior ranking, I think having the secrecy around it will lead to even more suggestion that it didn't, and this was a political decision. So having that evaluation would actually be helpful if Campbellton clearly did rank on top based on all these items. It's just it didn't show up anywhere along the way as a location. Potentially the minister's saying or would suggest that that was largely overlooked by this feedback and consultation by the stakeholders and parents and families. It's just when the minister knows as well, being involved with government in the past and currently dealing with these issues so complex between multiple departments, such a lack of support and service, disconnected between government departments, families that are struggling, to have such valuable resources and scarce resources and something that people should be celebrating, they're not celebrating. Not everyone anyways. Of course, a few people in the, like the mayor of Campbellton and the minister from that area, but by and large, there's not a lot of people in this field, in this work, that's saying this was a good decision. Does that alone concern the minister, that this should be a day of celebration and not one of criticism to this extent? Having these scarce resources going into such an important service and so needed, that's been recognized over all of these years from both political parties back, as I said, when 2008, the Connecting the Dots report, to, in my opinion, one of the best government sponsored written reports that I've ever read in these years, and so tied to stories and real lives, but also tied with some real solutions to bring down these barriers between government departments. Certainly as a minister involved with the former government, privacy legislation has always been a red herring, has always been, in my opinion, a distraction, has always been a reason to often not only have barriers, but to create further barriers. And a lot of work had been done around privacy and legislation, and often we as government folk make things more complicated than they need to be. And in the last months of the government, I remember no conversation in my part of the work ever having anything to do with this not becoming a community-based, and certainly a privacy problem, and certainly not with a shift of Campbellton on the table. I'm not saying it hadn't been there. It's just I guess I'll have to talk to my colleagues or colleague about that. But I find privacy legislation and government run being two reasons to place this in Campbellton. It just doesn't add up to me. When the government was deciding upon Campbellton, did you involve the DOTS NB, Maureen Bullerman, as an example? Did you involve Bernard Richard and Shirley Smallwood? Did we, along with that evaluation that you won't make public, did we do a broad range consultation similar to the 2011? If the minister says things had changed, this would be government run, shouldn't change the criteria of the services in the community. Did he undertake a broad consultation to people in the sector, families and children, in addition to the professionals at Vitalite?
Well, there was a very long preamble there and many things that I want to touch on here before getting to the substance of the question. And I guess maybe it should be no surprise that the member opposite doesn't think privacy legislation can get in the way, because this is the same member who, as a former Minister of Education, leaked student test scores. So privacy legislation obviously wasn't important to him when he was on this side of the House, but it is important to us. And I think it's important to remind people here, because we're making it sound as if Campbellton is this awful place that nobody should ever set foot in, and that is just ridiculous, Mr. Chair. I should remind people now that it's okay now to send our youth who require these services out of province. So we can send them to other provinces, we can send them to other jurisdictions, but we can't send them to Campbellton, New Brunswick. I have a serious problem with that, Mr. Chair, because Campbellton, the last time I checked, was part of this province. Last time I checked, Campbellton was one of our 8 cities. Last time I checked, Campbellton had a base of expertise there and a willingness to embrace this project and to make something great with this project, where we're now sending people from outside, we're sending people outside of the province to get these services. And to hear people say, oh my God, how can we possibly expect people from Moncton, Fredericton or St. John to drive to Campbellton for a service? Well, I think the answer is pretty clear. In the same way that we expect people from Edmundston, Campbellton, Bathurst, Caracat, Tracadie, Miramichi to come to Moncton, Fredericton, and St. John on a regular basis for services and programs. Because we can't afford to have these services in every community. And we put some, you know, there are centers that are there to serve the entire province. Is it so bad to ask somebody from Campbellton who needs to see a cardiac specialist to go to St. John? Is that so terrible? No, because St. John is where the expertise is, and we don't have the capacity to build up that expertise in every community in the province, so we create a center of excellence. Well, we're doing the same thing with this service in Campbellton, and the last time I checked, Mr. Chair, the roads that we build, they go in both directions. So if somebody can drive from Campbellton to Moncton, they can drive from Moncton to Campbellton as well. There are lanes that go in both directions. So I simply don't accept the argument that Campbellton is this terrible place on earth that we shouldn't be sending our children to. And I really, it's beyond frustration. Now, as to consultation, I took offense to the fact, and I've said this publicly, I took offense to the fact that Bernard Richard claimed that he had not been consulted. And I have a lot of respect for Bernard Richard. Everybody knows the relationship I have with Bernard Richard. I was his former executive assistant when he was a minister in this House. But for Bernard Richard to say that he was not consulted on this issue is simply wrong. We had multiple conversations. We had a coffee just across the way here once at the Crown Plaza. We had multiple conversations on this particular issue, on whether the centre should go to Moncton or Campbellton. So for Mr. Richard to say that he was not consulted, that is not fair. That is not fair, and that is not correct. Now, the fact that we didn't agree with what his recommendation was, we can debate that. But that doesn't mean he was not consulted. And he has been, by the member's own account, he's been the leader on this file, and yes, he was consulted. But for other reasons, as we pointed out, Vitalité, their recommendation was clear. They felt that Campbellton was the better location of the two to provide this service, and we went with that recommendation.
Well, I need to make it clear that asking these questions in the way I've asked them, in no way have I stated that Campbellton is a bad place to send people. There are other services in Campbellton, as the Minister knows and has said, and that everyone knows. What is frustrating and demeaning is when there's been so much effort from 2008 to 2011, consultation by experts, by families and children that struggle every single day. While we've made progress with this project in integrating services between departments, it's still not good enough. When you have public safety and probation that's disconnected from justice, that's disconnected from education, that's disconnected from health, that's disconnected from social development, that's disconnected from Vitalité or Horizon, the disconnection is still there. And trying to push this change, this mindset, trying to provide better services. It's a regret that while we're in government, we can't get enough change happening fast enough. But it's the system we're in. We're trying to. There's people that are living and breathing and having this happen, this change take place, and we've really been trying to collectively, between the two governing parties in New Brunswick during this time. And what's frustrating is not to make this into an anti-Campbellton debate. What's frustrating was all of this work has been put into the consultation, to having criteria, to having some synergy, to provide new service based on accessible geography, based on university research, based on official languages, based on existing child and adolescent psychiatric, based on portage, being nearby, all these criteria seems to have been dismissed. And I believe that's a big crux of this is, you know, there's been a lot of work. And to see Campbellton come out as the location and announced not even by the minister, announced by the minister's colleague in another department, who's the regional minister, designated politically as the regional minister, that adds even more disdain to the decision-making process. And no one's throwing stones. I'm certainly not trying to throw stones. Being involved with a couple of governments myself, knowing that decisions are hard to make and that there are never perfect decisions. But on this one, with so many personal lives involved and so much emotion and effort, my real question was not whether Bernard Richard, I guess I mentioned Bernard Richard, I personally had not heard him say he wasn't consulted. I had heard the same thing that you had made mention of, is that he reached out, he had had conversations with the Premier and with the Minister, and he wasn't happy with the decision and whatnot. But my further question to that was, who else was consulted? If Bernard Richard and the member from Edmundston was consulted, who else was consulted? Were there other members of the legislature consulted? Were there other stakeholders, like Maureen Billerman, who on the CBC Morning Radio said that she had never heard Campbellton be mentioned in the last 4 years in this effort and in this field around the province, providing support for families and children. And I'm asking, was Maureen Billerman of DOTS NB? Was the Partners for Youth consulted? Were there other organizations that were involved with this decision and that have endorsed the decision for this location at Campbellton?
So I'll get to that question. Well, I think I've covered that question, but you know, to hear the member get up and say that because it was another minister of government that made the announcement that was wrong, which is crazy. The member has been minister before. He's made announcements on behalf of other ministers. He's had other ministers make announcements on his behalf. On Saturday, I had two very important events that I had to attend in southeastern New Brunswick. We don't have a plane anymore. Former government sold that, so it was impossible for me to be at both locations at once. I was at a 40th anniversary event in my own riding on Saturday afternoon, and Saturday evening I was in Moncton for the Heart and Stroke Foundation's event. And that, if the member wants to see my calendar, I'll gladly provide that to him. But for him to say that because another minister made the announcement, you know, that something's fishy, that something doesn't look right, well then why is he asking me questions here today? Why isn't it my critic? Because my critic supports the Campbellton location. That's why my critic is not asking the questions today, and you are. Because the member opposite is not the former Minister of Social Development, he's not the former Minister of Health, and he's not the current critic for social development or the current critic for health. So why is this member the one asking me the questions today and not the critic for health? It's because she said herself that she agreed with the Campbellton position. She agreed with the Campbellton position. It was the right thing to do. But she obviously hasn't been able to convince her caucus colleagues of that. So that's why it was the Leader of the Opposition asking questions yesterday. And that's why it's the member for Mukto Lincoln that's asking questions today. Because the member from Edmundston Madawaska Centre cannot get up and ask questions about this because she agrees with the decision.
It's unfortunate the minister can't answer the questions. He's obviously in defensive mode, and he questions my integrity of why I'm asking the questions. And I really don't want to get into this type of battle when it's not about me and you, quite frankly. And I've not attacked you. I've asked questions about this issue, and I've clearly stated that it's very emotional. People have spent a lot of time on this issue, including myself, thank you very much. And I will take my right and my privilege as a member of this legislature, who I've had constituents, most likely like most of us other MLAs, have had constituents come to me in tears. One couple came to me when about 7-8 years ago. And this couple lost their daughter at 13 years old in middle school, who said that they felt their daughter had committed suicide because of mental health issues, because of bullying in school, because they couldn't get the right support. And you know, I remember that meeting at my constituency office probably more than any other meeting that I've had. And being a father myself, and others in this house being parents, being family members, I can't help but be brought to tears and to think that someone's 13-year-old daughter didn't feel that they had the support, or the parents didn't feel that they had the support that they needed. And ever since that meeting, I said, you know what? I'm going to use my position in any way possible to make these lives better. And it's very complex. We may never have the answers to some of these questions we're looking for. There was another situation of why I'm personally deeply involved with this issue. I had a gentleman who has a son, a couple of sons, but one in particular that has autism. And around the same time period, 8 to 10 years ago, he was showing aggressive behavior in a special care home. The parents couldn't look after him. He assaulted someone. The department and government said there was no support for this young man. The only place he could go was Centre Care. On the protest of community partners, on my protest, a physical, literal sit-in on my part to the Minister of the day at Social Development, who then I became a lightning rod of irresponsible, someone who wasn't rational, who was embarrassing the minister in front of her staff. She later then crossed the floor and became a Liberal, by the way. But I will tell you, on my way home, without getting the minister to budge or the department, I sobbed and cried on the way home because I knew Centre Care was the wrong place for this gentleman and young man. I even called the Premier's office and talked to the Chief of Staff, and that was the end of my line on this issue, on that family situation. It wasn't even a constituent of mine. And lo and behold, in the 2008 report by Bernard Richard, he told of 12 stories, and one of those stories was this young man that I couldn't help. And this young man was displayed in this Connecting the Dots, and it was found and became known after that he was sexually assaulted at Centre Care. And it, I suppose, if anything, it vindicated, but does very little for this young man and his family. Later, after the sexual assault and being at Centre Care locked up, he got moved to Maine. And I said to myself, again, this is wrong. We know there are families struggling, and there needs to be better support. When I had an opportunity to go into Cabinet as Minister of Education and Early Childhood Development in the last 4 years, I used that opportunity to help work on this issue from integrated services to a tertiary program of Centre of Excellence, and worked with my colleagues to try to move that issue forward, jumping over hoops and hurtling around lots of barriers between government departments. And currently now in opposition to be questioned by the minister because he may not have a more than perfect decision that he's made and he's getting criticism, he then feels he has to attack me again on why I'm asking questions. And I do not need to justify it, but I will mention being the former minister. I will mention having constituents come to my office in the manner that they have. And I will mention that I'm the critic for disability issues as well. And that I take very seriously, because being the most underrepresented vulnerable group in our province, I will continue to ask these questions. And when there is certainly all this work and consultation in 2011 that people put in good faith, and you see that this decision has been made that goes a little less obvious than what the criteria was set out in the 2011, it does get people discouraged that the scarce resources that we're putting in place has been set back, and that this project, which people were to celebrate, has been given a little bit of a black cloud around it. And so I will continue to ask the questions around this project. And my question was, in addition to Bernard Richard, now that you've said Bernard Richard has been consulted, what other organizations have said yes to this proposal to move this centre to Campbellton? Has Maureen Billerman and DOTS-NB, have there been other consultations? If there hasn't been an exhaustive list, we can move on. If you're still not prepared to answer the question, then I'll have my question answered with your silence.
Through the chair to the member opposite. We're both passionate, so we'll try to, I'll do my best to tone it down, and I apologize if I offended the member opposite. But I also feel passionately about this because, you know, we've seen too often where, you know, there's a lot of people out there that think that absolutely everything we do as a province needs to happen in Moncton, Fredericton, and St. John. And we do have other parts of this province. Yes, Moncton, Fredericton, and St. John are the economic engine, and yes, it's where the bulk of the population is. But we have other communities across this beautiful province of ours, and we can't always gravitate every single program and service around Moncton, Fredericton, and St. John. And although I'm from Shediac, which is closer to Moncton than it is to Campbellton, I feel strong about that we can't just neglect other parts of the province. You know, the member opposite is referred to, you know, the various reports, whether it be connecting the dots, whether it be staying connected. A lot of very good work has been done. And we should be celebrating this event, because this is a $12.6 million investment in this centre that is going to help the continued development of this network of excellence. And you know, the member opposite also, you know, talked about the integrated service delivery model. This is also, you know, these are all parts of the puzzle to try to deal with the situations that the member opposite described, whether it be the young girl or the young man that he described. But what people need to understand is, like the two examples that the member opposite gave, if at a point in their life they would have required the services of this centre, up until now and for the foreseeable future, we have to send them out of province, because we don't have that capacity here in the province. So a decision has been made to invest in this capacity so that we have it here in the province. Now, whether it be Moncton or Campbellton, yes, there's all kinds of arguments that can be made on either side. But I would still rather send, I'd rather send my daughter. I've got two daughters that are 12 and 16, and I'd prefer sending them somewhere in the province than have to send them out of the province. If ever they required that care, those services. So, you know, just because this centre is in Campbellton and not in Moncton does not mean that all those other recommendations as part of that report are not going to be followed through on. Doesn't mean we're not going to have this network of excellence. We're still, you know, everybody wants to see this network of excellence in this centre provide the necessary support for the youth that need it. Now, specifically to the consultation, as I've said before, there's been consultation between the Department of Health, the Department of Social Development, the two regional health authorities, and Bernard Richard. Those are, in terms of the consultations that I have had as minister, that is the extent of it. And at one point, obviously, we needed to make a decision. And you know, this is money that's in the capital budget, and we want to make sure that the money goes where it's intended to go, and a decision had to be made. But no, there are not other, in terms of consultations, those are the consultations that took place.
appreciate the honesty on that, and I'm not surprised. In terms of the decision that was made, and based on that scope of consultation, knowing that at least one of those partners or persons, partner might be strong now at this point, for this week anyways, in Bernard Richard, had not recommended Campbellton. So it does, you touched on it, if this recommendation's not followed, it does put in question, my colleague has asked this, it puts in question the whole model, it puts in question all the other recommendations, and this being a key part of the Center of Excellence, the location, for a variety of the reasons as mentioned. If this hasn't been followed as a recommendation, in fact, when we've changed our decision to something else that had never been mentioned, and no consultation around back to the field, the people we're supposed to be working with, then there's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done by the minister and the government if they hope to have a synergy of momentum or buy-in and support and change in the community regarding the other recommendations. It puts in question, it puts in doubt the whole project. It really does. And I'm glad to hear the minister say that it doesn't, and it won't, but we'll now really only be able to tell with actions. And so far the actions around this project haven't been in line with the recommendations by the stakeholders and the people in the field. So that's what's discouraging around I guess the confidence and the direction of this entire project has been put into question. So as always, we're more than willing to provide support on this project, in particular mental health and this whole issue going across political lines. There's lots of stones that can be thrown, and that's certainly not what I enjoy doing. So I'll certainly throw that out there again. I would have a final question around the management of the center. At one point in time there was discussion around a community-based advisory group that would provide protection for community and families rather than a government insulated government institution, that we actually ensure that it is what it's intended to be. Has the minister given further thought? While it's not constructed yet, there's still the planning, there's still the specifications, the design. Will the minister go beyond Vitalité, social development, the health department, and even go beyond Bernard Richard in this case? In addition to the location, will he go beyond these partners, go out into the field, provide an advisory committee around the Center of Excellence now, leading into the construction, and then for the operation and oversight and accountability of the Center of Excellence as well?
I thank the member for the question, and the short answer is yes. Yes, there will still be a community-based advisory group, and that was the whole, now that the location is set, we can move forward with the next steps. We're reaching out to the various stakeholders that have been part of this since day one. There's already been an invitation or a meeting request sent out to Partners for Youth, for the Child and Youth Advocate, to come together hopefully next week with staff from within government to start looking at the next steps. As we said, the whole idea is that this center is part of a network of excellence, and that network of excellence is still very much a priority. It's where we want to go. It's what we want to develop. I'll remind the member, maybe he wasn't here the day we were talking about it, in this year's budget there is $200,000 set aside to hire a coordinator that's going to work specifically on this network of excellence. So this person will obviously be heavily involved in the project of the center, as well as reaching out to the stakeholders and making sure that we do have that very strong, very solid community-based advisory group that the member opposite is asking for.